This is a podcast about rejecting tyranny and oppression by cultivating both systemic and individual change. I believe the only way to create this kind of monumental change is to inspire understanding, love, and kindness. From there, we can work to embody these essential values in our cultural systems and in our individual lives. My hope is that by effectively communicating with anyone and everyone, we can establish a shared vision for humanity and explore new ways of living to build a better world for all of us. I'm your host, Nathan Jones, and this is the Kindness Rebellion. Thank you for listening to episode 15 of the Kindness Rebellion. This week I have Tyler Gibbs on the podcast. Tyler is a Utah entrepreneur with a lot of cool businesses. Specifically, what's your latest venture called?
Audio House.
Audio House. So make sure to check it out. The reason I asked Tyler to be on the podcast today was to go over his experience homesteading, your experience up here in Fruitland, Utah, and just kind of the entire premise of that and what it took to make that happen, why he finds it valuable. So I really appreciate you being here with me today, Tyler.
Absolutely.
This is a really cool opportunity. It's great to see you after so long. We haven't seen each other in years, but it still feels like I know you so well. So it's awesome to just kind of rekindle that right away. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to see you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, man. So let's just dive right into it, dude. So I love the entire concept of homesteading. I love the freedom and the autonomy that it provides, and also the ability to kind of reconnect with our evolutionary roots, like our ability just to live off the land and understand how to cultivate life and just that freedom aspect of it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to kind of start with just why did you even decide to buy this property? Why did you decide to start homesteading?
Yeah, well, I mean, 100% honest, for me, I can't answer that question without bringing up a little bit of the spiritual side in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that really is just the fact that, Anna and I were recently married. We've been married for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And we jumped straight into having kids, which was not fully planned, but it was, it was not something we were avoiding either.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we only been married about a year. We just had Rachel, our first daughter, and we were living in a small apartment in South Salt Lake. And we walked to a park, and in that park, for whatever reason, we both just sat down on a bench and felt like we had kind of escaped the world. Mm-hmm. And as we were just sitting there playing with our baby, it was like this feeling went over both of us. It was one of those moments where we both looked at each other and knew that we were both feeling the same thing. That's so cool. Which is kind of why I see, on a spiritual regard, it was just something that hit both of us. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was something that we needed to follow. And it was just that feeling of we need to get out of the city. Mm. We need to find some land, whatever that may be, whatever that may look like. Which was a strange feeling for us to have. We did not have any money. Again, I was 23, 24. She was pretty young.
Yeah.
I think Anna would have been only 19.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, I had just finished college. I had no money. We're how the heck are we going to get out of here and buy land? Anyway, so, but kind of as we followed that, feeling that we felt to do that. We weren't really big into homesteading. Anna had lived in a kind of homestead environment for a lot of her life. Her family also lived in a camper and just traveled everywhere though. So
mm-hmm.
it wasn't like homesteading was our primary goal. It was more following that feeling that we needed to get out of the city, that we needed to have a place where our kids could experience nature, could connect. But again, all of that was more just building logical pieces on top of that underlying feeling that was completely unlogical of just, we need to get out.
Yes.
I could go on forever about logical reasons we've discovered since then, but it really was that feeling.
Honestly, I don't think there's any reason to shy away from that spiritual feeling and that deep sense of longing for nature and to kind of get out of the city. Because I think a lot of us, I'm mostly speaking for myself, I'm really in that same boat where there is just a deep need for nature. I think we've definitely put ourselves in an environment that we are not evolved for, specifically the city life and specifically, late stage capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that the feeling of just like, we need to get out. We need to be able to reconnect with nature, reconnect with the land, reconnect with ourselves.
Yeah.
That's a very valid feeling, and I think it's something that's deeply felt by a lot of people. So
totally,
I like it a lot. But like, for those that really do want to know the logical reasons, what were the logical reasons that started to pull you into that? Like, you said you weren't really focused on homesteading per se, but what is it that actually drew you into homesteading?
Yeah, well, Anna's degree is in child development, and she's like a pretty highly respected Montessori teacher for the infant to toddler realm. That's kind of what she focuses on, is infant to toddler.
Yeah.
And, within that child development regard, I mean, reasons galore for being not in the city, right?
Yeah.
I mean, simple enough of like being able for Rachel and Grace now to be able to run around and play on 5.5 acres with nothing outside of that 5.5 acres that could hurt them really. Like, they have that full autonomy to explore, to find out like, what is a rock and does it hurt? Apparently it does. Yeah. Like, but to be in a safe environment where it's not like, what is asphalt? Does it hurt? Yeah. Which is a different thing, or what is a car? Yeah, exactly. What is a car and does that hurt? So totally different risk level for, I almost said for students. We're all students of life, but for kids to explore and enjoy life and play, which is the way we learn naturally, even as adults, right? And if we choose to play in the right regards. And so, but specifically animals started to come into the picture because I have and it wasn't, I think, because of how I was raised. I think it might just be a little more my personality and the empathy I have, but like, I deeply care a lot about animal life and plant life. And of course I recognize that like, in order to sustain my life and to eat, whether even if I was vegan, there's still this kind of concept of, you have to kill a plant or, an animal either way to survive. That's kind of just a matter of fact of the life that we live. Well,
especially as omnivores, as human omnivores, like we have to consume things. And I like that you also incorporate plant life into that, because it can be destructive when we have monoculture crops, or we have things like that where it's plant life, and so we're not necessarily killing an animal life, but we are still like annihilating the environment by not honoring it for what it really is.
Well, so environment's a huge aspect. On an individual perspective of the plant, some plants, you could say it's a little different, because like an apple or fruits tend to just be the like the reproductive aspect of the plant, right? Although, for things like potatoes, that's literally the root of the plant. That's like, you cannot eat the potato without destroying the plant. And so, and other things where it might be the stalk, like rhubarb and stuff like that. Anyway, kind of a different aspect. But anyway, so there's kind of like that concept of, that's just the reality of things. What we can do is respect and honor and love and connect with life as much as we can with, reality is always a limiting factor to things. Yeah. But as much as we realistically can, we can connect with life and love it and honor it. And
still consume it.
And that might be, that gets into like a whole different concept of things. But so anyway, so that's something we wanted for our kids. And so bees got involved in our life, and chickens got involved in our life, and pigs got involved in our life, which has all been a wonderful experience. And of course, there's been lots of species of plants involved in that process as well. So, we have, we haven't been great at keeping a lot of those alive, unfortunately. But we've had blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, apple trees, peach trees, all sorts of things here.
Here's the thing, man. Like, it just you going out and just doing the work, just trying to get those experiences and get that knowledge, gather that, is just so valuable and so important. I think one thing that's been really hard for me particularly is just seeing like seeing these lifestyles and seeing this way of living through the lens of like social media or even just like like documentaries and movies and things like that. The thing that's been so hard is that it just seems like very oversimplified, or it's just kind of given to me in a way that's like, oh yeah, you have to do this if you want to be this way, you should do it this way if you want to be this way, and then just making it. And then I'm starting to learn how the hardest part is just getting started. Is actually just doing it and allowing yourself to fail, allowing those things to hit you in the nuts, and just having to learn from it. And so I think that's what's been so valuable from what I'm seeing from you is just you actually going out here, you got your land, and you're just trying to learn how to work with it. And honestly, I think it's really cool. I think I can tell that it's probably been very valuable for you.
Oh, absolutely. Very valuable. But I mean, I think going back to even what I said about our kids, the way humans learn is through play, right? And if you are willing to enjoy the process and willing to recognize like, okay, play includes getting hurt sometimes.
Yeah.
Play includes like jumping off a 20-foot, balcony and realizing like, I don't want to do that again. Yeah. Like that hurt. Like that's how we learn.
Yeah.
And so if your play is buying real estate, growing plants on the land that you bought, cultivating it, like you're in a journey of play.
Yeah.
You're in a journey of, okay, the next step is I guess I'm going to have fun reading contracts and figure out what that's like. And like, I guess I shouldn't say I need to, because that almost takes the play out of it. It's just like, that's what I stumbled upon.
Yeah.
That's what I think we can learn so much from kids is like their play normally isn't planned. They are heading in a direction and they're stumbling upon life. And if you're, the older we grow, like the consequences get bigger. Like if you stumble on a bad contract deal, that might affect the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But I think that when we are when we have paralysis because we're too scared of the consequences, that approach doesn't allow us to learn. What allows us to learn instead is, well, I'm going to stumble into this. I'm going to have the foresight to know like,
mistakes will be made. So what do I need to research now so that when I get to that area of play, I'm prepared for it? That's so valuable. Kind of I love that analogy. That is like so important. I think it shows how you're willing to not only just take risks, but see risk in a different way and see life in a different way, because I think that's something we're really missing. A lot of people are missing that. It's either I'm only going to make big changes in my life if I know or at least I think I know what the outcome is going to be.
Which we never know.
Never. And I love the idea that it's not even really focused on the outcomes. It's not even focused on like achieving a goal. I'm sure that's a part of it, but it sounds like it's so much more focused on learning and play, like you're saying, and just really integrating with it and working with it, which I think is honestly so valuable.
Well, and this might be taking a small detour, but I think from some of the best business mentors that I've learned from, I guess two aspects. Anytime that we're making a goal, in my opinion, a better effective goal is not focused around like what are the outcomes. Obviously outcomes are generally part of the language of a goal. And our goals need to be like realistic and within our control. But generally, when you look at like life-oriented things, what's in your control is not outcomes-based. So if you're trying to make goals for your personal life about like, I will have X amount of money by this time in my life, or I will have this car by this time in my life, a lot of the time, like, that's not actually the goal that's in your control. The goal that is in your control is on a daily basis, I'm going to learn X amount of things, which will lead me to this lifestyle that I'm looking for. So what's interesting is that like when I set goals, my goals generally tend to be not outcomes based, but lifestyle based, which leads to an objective.
It's
that
like
I'm
habit
going
forming.
For. Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that a lot.
Which was, trying to step back into the homestead. Same thing with buying the homestead, right? Yes, like we had the objective of, okay, we feel like we need to get land. We feel like we need to buy this place. We don't even know what that is going to look like.
Yeah.
We have no idea we've never farmed before. Like, and so it was kind of just like, well, I'm going to research these kinds of things. I'm going to start looking into it. And my objective is, yes, like to get the home, but my everyday objectives are just, learning about let's start with Googling like, what is homesteading?
Yeah. Back to square one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's an important part for people to remember, because I mean, yeah, you can sit there and be like, okay, I'm only going to be successful if I have this many acres and I'm producing this many things and this. But at the end of the day, the more important goals are whatever you're establishing for yourself every day to keep moving towards kind of the overall vision, right? And I see that in a much larger sense, and I think that's why homesteading has been so interesting to me, because I think that by having more people homesteading or learning how to homestead and just like being able to cultivate an environment for themselves, we're just all moving. I would see us all moving in more of a direction of this kind of like autonomy, community, and like a more realistic and sustainable view of our resources and of our environment. So I guess one of my big questions for you is like, do you think more people should homestead? Do you think that this should be more of an accessible lifestyle to people?
I think should is always a hard question to answer on that regard, right?
We're going to force everyone to homestead.
Yeah. New mandate.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, when we look, one, as attractive as homesteading is, I think one thing to remember is that our forefathers moved away from this lifestyle for a reason. And part of that is simply like, if everyone was homesteading, then we'd go back to the ages where 90% of your time is spent growing food, and you have 10% or maybe even less of your time to like do stuff you want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Most of your time is going to be like in the field, getting dirty with animals and plants, right? like you spend most of your work for the rest of your life, because you also can't build much. I guess I'll use the term wealth. Like you can't build a retirement farming. Even like whether the capitalist society, like all that aside, you're generally only really able to produce enough for you and a few other families. And if everyone was doing that, even with the right structures in place, we wouldn't have amusement parks anymore. There wouldn't be time for it. There wouldn't be a need for it. Like, so a lot of the things that we enjoy about life would go away.
Yeah.
So, should everyone homestead? Maybe not, unless that's what we as a community decide we all want to go towards.
Yeah.
Now, let me bring up some other sides to that, though. The current average in America, the average age of someone that raises food for the rest of the 300 million people living in America is 70 years old.
Wow.
So let me talk about food crisis for a second.
Yeah, please.
In about 10 years, we're going to be losing the majority of our food creators.
In America.
Who's going to take their place? I think that's one like side of the equation that people are missing, as we're kind of like rampaging is the wrong word, like protesting against factory farms. I on an ethics basis, on a sustainability basis, on an like everything basis, I do not like the idea of factory farming. On a feeding the people basis, if we do not have more people go into homesteading or into agricultural farming, which obviously can produce much more, because on a homestead basis, you really, like I said, you can only produce so much. When you're incorporating more modern techniques, that would kind of put you more in the category of farming. Then you can produce for hundreds, thousands of people even. And so on that side of the equation, it's like, well, in the next 10 years, who's going to fill these shoes? We're going to have to rely on factory farms, because unless within the next 3 years more people make a change.
And I think something important to bring up is that if we do lose those food producers in America within the next 10 years, sort of the only solution that I know of, or the only solution that I'm seeing being implemented right now, is a global supply chain of agriculture, where we're actually not actually doing any food production in the US. Like, we'd actually move away from that and start essentially, I feel, stealing resources from other countries in order to sustain ourselves, which I see as very, 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 very catastrophic. It's just not going to be sustainable for us, for those countries, for the world.
Yes.
So I think that's a very important thing to bring up, because maybe factory farming isn't ethical or isn't sustainable in many ways, but it needs to be brought home in many ways too. It's been really sad to see in Utah how we're just selling off all of our farmland to build real estate instead, housing and apartments and things, because we're totally cutting off our ability to even provide for ourselves. And I think that's what homesteading seems to be so valuable for me, or the value that homesteading brings for me, is just the idea that people are becoming more connected with nature. They're becoming more connected with where their food comes from, so that they can actually have that knowledge and that skill set, so that like we just kind of raise the global consciousness.
Yes.
Because I wanted to, real quick, sorry, I wanted to speak to the idea that obviously homesteading probably shouldn't be for everybody, or not necessarily, that should word, like it just isn't going to be for everybody. There's definitely going to be people that it's just like, I have no interest in this. I'm not even good at it. I'm not even producing anything helpful for people. And that's fine. But there's something so needed in what I think in the human experience to know how to work with nature, how to understand where our food and our resources come from, so that we can actually be way more conscious of it and use it in a sustainable way.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot you brought up that I kind of want to address, but I think that to your last point, to respond to that immediately, should everyone homestead? Probably not. Should everyone be connected to a homestead or to a farm, like a local farm? 100%. I think so. Because you're talking about that global consciousness and kind of, well, I guess both global and individual, like a societal consciousness of where does my food come from? I think for anyone listening to this podcast that has had personal experiences with hunting or with growing a garden, with anything where they're actually connected to what they've consumed, I think anyone that's been involved in that will agree that it is an extremely valuable part of the human experience and will change. If you haven't, I invite you to find some way to get connected to that. It will change your life and your perspective of life in a way that I think is, I don't want to use the word necessary, but I think I'm going to use the word necessary for like, that is necessary to have a spiritual fulfillment of like your identity. I think that you're actually missing a big part of your identity if you don't feel connected to what you're literally living on and putting in your body. Am I okay to get a tiny bit religious?
Please do. Honestly, I want to I'll clarify this for you, because with the Kindness Rebellion, I am not trying to shy away from spirituality or religion in any way. Where despite my personal experiences with the LDS Church, I do value spirituality in so many aspects. And I actually very much resonate with what you're saying about how knowing where your food comes from, knowing how the environment and nature works, is a very fundamental part of the human experience that is being delocated, that is being deracinated completely. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that spirituality, religion are, I think like two different discussions, right? But I think in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have something that, for anyone that doesn't know, is something called the Word of Wisdom. And something that I think is forgotten, or maybe I shouldn't even say forgotten. I don't know if it was ever kind of perceived this way, but the interesting thing is if you're actually reading the reason why God gave the Word of Wisdom, it doesn't say for your health. It doesn't say, which is like the common belief of people both outside and inside the church. That like, this is a guideline for you to be healthy. The fascinating thing to me is that the reason, if you believe that this was given by God, the reason why that God gives himself is, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but basically like, because of the designs of like corrupted men that's going to come out later on in life, I give you this word of wisdom so that we can avoid some of those problems. Well, let's talk about, there's a lot of people know from the word of wisdom that members of the church don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, stuff like that. But let's talk about what we're talking about right now with homesteading. The word of wisdom encompasses like eat meat sparingly. If you eat meat sparingly, and only like really in times of famine or like when you need it. Outside of that, grow crops locally in their season, like eat things in their season. And going back to what you're talking about with the global supply chain, let me talk about the implications of what I think actually this word of wisdom was trying to forewarn us about. Again, being religious and kind of spiritual here, God loves all of his children. when one nation comes in and says, we're going to turn your nation into the food provider for our nation, we're not going to pay you.
Yeah.
We're going
pay
to
you the very minimum.
Or pay you the minimum. We're going to destroy your whole lifestyle. And essentially, the consequences of this make it, I'm not going to say impossible, but extremely difficult for a nation to grow beyond what kind of the income that we set for that nation. And I think that, again, the word of wisdom has some, we continue to learn that there are health benefits to living the word of wisdom. But going back to that idea that it wasn't given for that reason, part of me, at least for me, I believe that part of that was to minimize and avoid what we're doing now with global supply chain. To say, because imagine if the whole nation lived by the word of wisdom, and we all only ate foods that were grown in their season. That means we don't have bananas.
Yeah.
Like the produce section of the grocery store, 90% of that would not be there most of the time for us here in Utah. And which you look at the backlog of where did that food come from? How many people are being exploited by that? How many of God's children could have so much better lifestyles, or at least have the opportunity for those lifestyles, whether they kind of did it themselves or not, but would have at least the opportunity, had the demands for supply chain not been instated. So anyway, that's, for me, I think that on a global perspective, there's two ways to go. And these are kind of extremes, right? Of course, there's everything in between. But on the two extremes, yes, we go the aspect of what you're saying. We take a small number of people, percentage-wise, worldwide, and have them grow the food for everyone else. And in order to make that happen, we'd have to be using systems and structures, and for affordability's sake, probably payment structures that would not make the life very desirable for that small group of people.
Yeah.
So that the masses could pursue their dreams, right? Like live the, I know that like American dream is kind of a term that isn't super positive anymore in this context, but like
bastardized.
But I guess going to the sense of like live in a society where they don't have to worry about food, they can have whatever other career they want. Or we could go to like the opposite spectrum, which is what we mentioned earlier of like everyone just farms. And then that puts us back into like the,
sort of regressive.
Yeah, pretty regressive. As with most things, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Where, sure, supply chain is a thing, but it's more localized, right? We have producers in most communities. Sure, we can let Silicon Slopes be a thing. That's an industry I'm very tied into, and we can have a lot of growth. We can have cities, but right outside those cities, we have lots of homesteaders, lots of farmers that are able to locally supply food in a way that the people within the cities can still be very connected to. They can, on weekends, if they want, can be going out and participating in a lot of that food production. And stuff like that actually makes things more economical. We don't have to ship things across the world. We're just shipping it 10 miles. So
this is actually something I kind of wanted to get your opinion on and feedback. Is just like, because the main reason that we have a global supply chain and that we have this centralized supply chain where we are just, having this very small concentrated area, pretty much just the global south that we're just taking all of their, food production and resources from. By having all of that, decentralizing that to like what you're saying, where our supply chains are more local, so there's like a localization of our supply chains. And the main reason that I see that not occurring right now is the monetary system is our main economic system of capitalism. But then there's this other alternative that I've been exploring with kind of my volunteer work with the Moneyless Society, of a resource-based economy, which is, it seeks to, essentially get rid of the monetary system so that our resources and our relationship to our resources within our economy is focused solely on
the resources within our decentralized, localized area. And I know that you're pretty much only getting, unless you've heard of it before, you're pretty much only getting what I just barely told you about it from it. But I'm curious if that's kind of the vision, the middle way that you're kind of seeing. Would it have to be something where it's like, it's actually more efficient in an ecological standpoint to have more of a localized supply chain than it would be to have a global supply chain with a centralized concentrated group of producers, right? Because the only reason we really do that right now is because it's economically more efficient or in a monetary way.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, I am not an expert in this area at all, and I don't watch where the money flows too well in this area, especially when I work in tech and supply chain is kind of far from me.
Yeah.
But like, in my opinion, I think from what I see that we're going to see a similar shift as what happened in like the late, I might get my decades wrong, but like late 80s, 90s area, where for a long time, the funny thing is that in business, there was this shift from mentality that kind of started a lot in Japan, of like, the cheaper we build things, the more money we're going to save. So the better our profits are going to be. What's funny is that we did that for a long time. Like, that was like the business mentality of like, if you're going to be a value company, make things cheap. What's interesting is that we started to find that like, that was not the case. The more the better quality material we used, the less our machines broke down, the less returns we had, and returns are costly for a business. It just went on down the line of like, building quality products was actually more profitable, even if you're trying to be like maybe I shouldn't mention a brand, but like the like value brand of anything.
Yeah.
Like, that building quality products was actually more profitable most of the time. And I think
just
that
in a very long-term sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes not even super long-term, sometimes like on a quarter long-term-ish, right?
Wow.
Depending on, again, the product in the industry, blah, blah, blah. Especially there's just kind of that, well, yeah, that's going to take me on a different tangent. But, and I think that we're going to see a similar mindset shift and honestly, we're already seeing it. I'll talk maybe a little briefly on this. Is just COVID, of course, disrupted a lot of global supply chain.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but Volkswagen, in immediate and quick response, as they kind of saw that was going to be happening, they shut down a lot of their global supply chain processes, and they localized fast.
Wow.
Now, did they take that took a ton of
probably capital
they had
to invest in it,
because it was like, we need manufacturing plants now. Like, let's not do this the cheap way. We just got to start buying and buying and buying so that we can supply cars. But what's interesting is that that gave them an advantage. Everyone talks about how Ford and GM and all these other companies have had all these problems because of supply chain issues during COVID. Yes, Volkswagen was impacted, but not nearly to the margin that these other manufacturers were. And the global supply chain, anytime that you add more pieces, which is what global supply chain is doing, you're adding more pieces, you get a more and more sensitive product, right? You get something that's one cog stops working and that could break everything.
Boom. Yeah.
So I think for a lot of reasons, companies are going to start shifting, and I think that COVID-19 was, the pandemic was a catalyst for Volkswagen, and it may be for a lot of other companies that are in similar boats, are going to start saying, that was scary.
Yeah.
Like, we went from X dollars to this, and it was literally just because this one supplier couldn't supply. We should maybe do something to prevent that from happening again, which the answer is going to be, we need to have more suppliers in more places. And yeah, in the long run, I think that if things are done right, we'll see that works better. Like, that the bottom line even improves. Unfortunately, one of the main pushes for globalized supply chain is, unfortunately, exploitation.
Yeah.
Is the fact that someone else's economy is in a worse shape than ours, so we can pay a lot less to get a similar product.
And get much more profit off of it in this market.
But again, what's fascinating about that is that and maybe I'm gonna kind of walk on glass here a little bit, because this does definitely go out of my expertise. but like we've seen examples of when bringing things home, and so actually I won't even bring up reasons because I don't know reasons, but we've seen examples where companies chose to bring things closer instead,
to localize their supply chain,
whether, you know, even if they're a global company, that they set up more places, and it worked out for them better than their competitors did. You know, why that is, like I said, I'm not the expert on that. Some of it might just come down to assets. They act, you know, I don't know, but it has, you know, and Tesla is one of those examples of someone who has chosen to keep things as close as possible. Yes, they launched with using China as much as possible, which, because again, I think it's cheaper up front. But as they've had profits to put into localizing, they've done it, and it's working out for them.
They just realize that it's more reliable and more sustainable in a way. It's an interesting tangent that we could go on here because I mean, you know, we started with homesteading and now we're at like a global supply chain and global capitalism. And I think the reason that it's also tied in and meshed together for me is because I wonder really how much we can make the big changes that we need in terms of like fighting climate change with a for-profit system. And even if I'm not, you know, I'm also not an expert, and I'm also not watching the trends. I'm not seeing if like, oh yeah, overall more companies are moving towards a localized supply chain. They're kind of removing the whole global supply chain. But I wonder if, even if we did do that, if we did localize our supply chain, how much would a for-profit system actually still benefit us? Because it's sort of, in my eyes, it relies on the exploitative and the extractive nature of that entire process. And most specifically, just like a disregard for nature, which is definitely what we do not need in terms of fighting climate change.
Totally.
Right? And that's why homesteading has just been so interesting to me, because like you said, it's about having more producers or more farmers within communities, and having people being able to produce for each other, and just kind of building a closer net of communities, rather than like the community being a collection of businesses. And I guess where I'm really going with that is, can homesteading be sort of part of that transition of just getting people more activated in supplying what humans actually need?
So in our current, if things stayed in a capitalist society as things are now, like here, if we're talking like here in the United States, I think that the honest truth is that unless people are willing to pay more for their food, it cannot. So I posted an Instagram post a little bit ago outlining a little bit of why we have to charge so much for, I shouldn't say this because, well, but I posted an Instagram post a little bit ago that outlines a little bit of like costs of pigs and pig meat. And one of the, it's sad, but like, the prices that you pay at the grocery store, we have to remember, are government subsidized prices. And that's one aspect. And on top of being government subsidized prices, they're also prices that are, because, you know, well, for a lot of reasons, we're willing to stomp on nature to lower cost. Now, what's interesting, and I will bring up here that like the food industry has been an interesting industry, and I think a lot of industries are this way, that like it's not like they're lowering cost just to make more money. A lot of times they're lowering cost simply because no one's willing to pay what they need to charge for their product. The food industry is that way. If you had to pay like actual cost of meat without government subsidies, without
exploitative or like unethical measures,
etc. And maybe I'll just walk through that really quick with pigs. So pigs, I like to use this term because it's a little shocking, but like we use toddler slaughter for pigs. We slaughter toddlers, right?
Good
so
God.
pigs they don't reach maturity, or you might say adolescence. They don't really reach adolescence until like 9 to 12 months, depending on the breed. we slaughter at 6 months. Right. So these are like equivalent to like a human 6, 7, 8 year old.
Wow.
Right. Or probably even younger.
Toddler slaughter.
Toddler slaughter. Right. Anyway. And we do that simply because of the cost of feed. So like for my pigs right now, it costs me, I should have maybe done this math beforehand, but they eat 7 pounds of food each per day.
Wow.
And so 7 pounds per day each. And if I'm having, if I wanted to be ethical and raise them to full adulthood, that's going to be like literally hundreds of dollars per pig more expensive than if I slaughtered them at 6 months.
Wow.
Now, and the growth rate, like by the time that they reach 6 months, they're still a pretty big pig. Yes, they're going to grow bigger. I mean, you got to walk outside and see my pigs.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
Yeah, the smaller ones that you saw are about 13 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they've been kind of the same size since 6 months. Like, yes, they've grown, but probably only by like 50, 60 pounds.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like much more cost effective to slaughter a 6-month-old pig. And that's how we get $2, $3, $4 per pound prices at the store. Wow. If I let my pigs, I guess I shouldn't say if, because I do. Since I let my pigs grow to be 24, 25, 26 months, right? So more than 2 years, they've all had litters. They've all had the opportunity to reproduce. They've all had the opportunity to raise another generation of piglets. Like they've done everything a pig can kind of do in life.
Yeah.
I have to sell their meat for at least, like just breaking even, this is let alone electricity costs and water costs and stuff like that. Like just for feed, I would have to charge $11 per pound.
Whoa.
For the average pig.
Compared to what did you say, $2 or $3
yeah,
per
compared
pound?
to like $2 to $3 per pound.
Holy shit.
So here's the question, right? For the listeners on this podcast, like, are you willing to pay $11 per pound for your food? If the answer is no, then we have a lot of problems before we're going to have more homesteaders. Because homesteaders can't, or farmers in general, are not going to be able to sell their food to anybody. And let's talk corn, for example. Corn is only as cheap as it is. The reason why we use it in everything is because the government pays like 99% of the cost.
Yeah.
And the person buying the corn only has to pay that 1%. And again, I might be exaggerating my numbers. I don't know the actual percentages.
I've heard this. It's something insane.
But it's something insane. Government subsidies are all over the board with agriculture because of those problems of the fact that like we don't have very many people making our food. The government needs to, and it's not a profitable business. So they need to incentivize, and depending on your political opinions might be the wrong word, but the fact of the matter is we have government subsidies so that we can all go to the grocery store and afford food at the prices we're used to. If we're all willing to times our food expense by 11, or by 6 or so, right? Then yeah, absolutely we can have more people homesteading and doing agriculture. If we're not, things need to change.
Yeah.
Whether that's a huge societal, like no more, like overthrowing capitalism completely and finding some other solution, like whether it's a big change or a series of small changes, something has to change.
I think one thing that's been really important about kind of just that experience that you outlined and just kind of looking at ways of transitioning to a better society and a more sustainable living and things like that is just understanding that with any meaningful change, any meaningful systemic change, there's going to have to be sacrifice. And I think, when we ask somebody, are you willing to pay more for food? They're going to be like, no way. Existence is already way too expensive. And so, and you can't really blame anyone for that, right? Like, it just makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, if I'm barely scraping by to afford to pay for existence, to pay for my food, of course it's going to be hard to say, well, if you want to have a better world and like more sustainable living and more you're supporting localized economies, you're going to have to pay like 5 times the amount for your food. But the way that I see it, and the way that we need to understand this situation and understand the way that we can make changes is through sacrifice, definitely, but also changing what our priorities are. you know, because like the sacrifices that I think we're going to have to make are going to be like, yeah, we're going to have to spend most of our money on food, which makes sense because, you know, we need food to survive. We need food to exist. Yeah, we're going to have to spend more money on, you know, maybe the way that we construct and build our houses to make sure it's more sustainable, to make sure it's more localized. Things like, it's just about identifying our basic necessities and making sure that we can actually be focusing on those. And I don't really like the idea that any systemic change has to be like all individual based, like, oh, we got to make sure to vote with our dollars or whatever it is, you know. But it, like, that has to be a part of the equation.
It's a part of the equation, absolutely.
It has to be at some point. So the way that I see it is like, we just need to be willing to understand that we need to change our priorities, because right now I think the things that we are willing to spend more on is sort of like our vices in a way, like our distractions, the things that just make us feel like less anxious or less depressed all the time. Yes, all of this shit, right? And it's like, and that's the things that we're willing to spend more money on, when it really should be the things that are necessary for our survival, necessary for, you know, sustaining the environment and the ecology of our environment. Because if we can just make those changes then, and allow ourselves to, you know, take that added expense and sacrifice all the other shit, then we're going to be more, we're going to open up more avenues for innovation in those areas. We're going to find out ways to make it more affordable, more easy to exist that way. And then we're going to start building towards making it more accessible and easy to use. And then we can start branching out from there and develop new interests and new ways of, you know, of coping with just the struggles of existence, the struggles of life.
Well, and let's be honest, like, honestly, even in the society that we have now, which, you know, we talked a little bit beforehand about kind of our beliefs in this, and I might, you know, bring up a little bit here, right? But as I say this, we'll see what comes out of my mouth. But like, even in the society that we have, for most people, if they were in their 30s and up, and this actually was the case for my, you know, because when I made that Instagram post, I had a poll at the end that just said, like, would you pay $11 a pound for meat if you knew that pig had, like, lived a full life? And what I noticed was, you know, really the equation, like the actual answer is, like, people that had the money to spend more said yes. And those that didn't said no. Which is not something to blame, right? But, you know, to break that down another second further, generally, this wasn't 100% true, but generally it was also an age gap, because the people that had money to spend were 30s and up, and, you know, they were out of college. They actually had, like, not to demean other people's jobs, but like
careers.
They had real careers, and they were established in a way that like they probably weren't paying rent. They were probably paying a mortgage. They were 10 years further in life. So they had, it's like, yeah, I can spend an extra like $300-400 on food, and I would feel like, for me to feel good about it. So I think most people like want those priorities. A lot of it is like, you know, and this goes into a lot of like other things that I think about, our relationship with our current economy. It is fascinating to me that the American culture has made young people feel so alone. Like in most cultures, it's not like you were like you turned 18 and were kicked out of the house. It's like, okay, son, like you're entering your adulthood. There's going to be some hard things, and like, I'm here. Like I've had my 50 years of building up my wealth, and like, let me help you get started. And I'm not saying that like parents should be paying for all their kids' stuff. In fact, I don't agree with that, you know, very much, but like, but that help is there, you know,
that
like
safety net,
you know, let me be the cosigner on your home, right? Like maybe I won't even put much down on it, but let me be the cosigner at least, so you can at least get a loan, you know, stuff like that. It's interesting to me that, I think that even without a big, massive change in our economy and in our structure, I think that a lot of these things are possible with going, you know, with kindness, and with a bigger sense of like, let's realistically look at the problems, and I have not, I love old people. And I think that actually one of the problems is that we're creating this gap, like this almost like hatred between young people and old people.
Yeah,
and
it's like a generational gap and like a warfare.
Absolutely. And certainly we think differently. Certainly there's, and there's things that have kind of led up to that. But like, if we could actually come together and say, hey, your wealth is what could bring up the younger generation to succeed better. Not saying you should start like just dumping your wealth on people, and not just wealth in finances, but also in knowledge and kind of what they've learned over the years. Right. But like, it's more greater connection is what makes a lot of this possible.
Oh yeah.
And I'm lucky enough that I got to live kind of that experience. That's an aspect of how we've been able to afford a lot of what we've been able to do now, is through outside support, some from parents, some from friends that just happen to be in a much better financial situation than we were in when we started needing to do this. But through finding win-win situations where they had cash, I had other resources that I could provide, and we were able to make win-win scenarios where this was able to be a thing. Awesome. So, I guess anyway, going back to the point is that like, can people afford this? Absolutely. Usually later on in life.
Yeah.
Who tends to be the ones that want to start a homestead? Like right now, at least the kind of, if we use the word trend, the trend is kind of like more people our age, you know, in their 20s. Maybe just recognize that like your friend group are probably not your target customers, because you're going to have to, honestly, if you want a homestead, like honestly, don't expect to charge the prices in the grocery store. Don't try and compete. Go to your rich friends and your older friends that can afford your stuff and say, hey, I'm charging 10 times more than what you could get at the grocery store, but here's why.
Yeah.
And when you explain why, most of them are going to say, oh my gosh, I don't want to buy toddler slaughter meat anymore. I would rather spend double, triple, quadruple to just have, to feel good about what I'm eating now that you've informed me.
And to be more connected with your community, with the people that you are working with, and the ecology and the nature that you are actually, consuming and taking from. And I don't want to say that in like a very like negative way, because like we said earlier, you have to take from nature. We are nature. We're continuously working with it, in tandem with it.
Nature gives and takes.
Yeah, it does.
And I'll be, honestly, the way that we slaughter animals, even in some of the most cruel ways, is way better than if that animal is being slaughtered by a wolf.
Because
just being honest,
that wolf does not give a shit about its feelings.
It does not, and it will eat that thing alive. So like, I'm not trying to support the fact that we don't take care of those things. I'm just trying to say that nature gives and takes. We have the consciousness and ability to treat that as carefully as we can, and I think we should.
Definitely.
But should we make that the determiner of whether or not we, we survive?
Yeah.
It's like,
or access our food.
We could go to, the furthest extreme would be, I don't want to harm anything. Okay, you're going to starve to death is the unfortunate truth.
Yeah, it is.
And so, I have like a Buddhist background. And so there's kind of a different thing beyond that, but if you're going to survive even as a Buddhist, you cause some harm. Yeah. And that's why it's about minimal harm, not zero harm.
And I think one of the really important things that we've been talking about is just the way that you're trying your best to minimize harm in a certain way. Like we just understand like, hey, there's this local resource, let's say it's pigs, and we all are relying on it to survive. We want to minimize harm there because we do see it as such an important part of sustaining ourselves. But I think what we also need to just pay attention to is what you brought up, where kind of creating that generational solidarity and like those communities that are all just kind of holding this shared vision, this shared why of like how we're getting our resources and why we're doing it this way is it's just going to ripple out and change so much, because that fundamental basis of we're trying to provide resources to everyone under the under the impression that we believe that everyone deserves to live. We believe that everyone deserves to have access to this, and the only way to do it right now is by increasing costs here. And if you start acting and operating on under that premise of just kindness, community, and understanding, like it's just we're gonna, like I said earlier, we're gonna build more innovative ways to minimize harm. We're gonna build more innovative ways to increase happiness, increase the resources that we have for people, because we're more focused on that than the bottom line of profit. And that is going to be the main thing. Because and that, I just want to drive that home, like that sacrifice in order to start moving in the right direction, knowing that maybe we won't find the solutions that will make everything better in our lifetime, but we're going to be planting the seed that our children and our further generations will be eating from. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is that generational solidarity and that generational cooperation that you're talking about.
Totally. And I mean, I feel like, in my opinion, that's when profit has to be involved, right? Like that we can do that effectively with just responsible, I just like to say responsible capitalism. I totally think that every economic structure is just a tool. And, I told you this earlier, that essentially, right, like capitalism absolutely is the best growth tool there is. And when a community comes together and says, we need to grow fast, like we need to grow wealth fast. And let's be honest, that's what our founding fathers were concerned about. I mean, it even shows in something as artistic as the play Alexander Hamilton, right? Like what was his focus? We need to get out of debt. Like the financial situation of the United States is a mess, and we need to create wealth. So was capitalism the right structure to create wealth? Absolutely. And even in my personal opinion, if it had retained its responsibility, we'd be in a totally different place than we are now. But that's kind of besides the point. And every economic structure, I guess all I wanted to say with that is like every economic structure has its purpose. And although capitalism can create great wealth, it doesn't incentivize very well the spreading of that wealth, which is kind of the, that's the downside. And if we want to change our focus to spreading wealth, then I think a different structure might be more effective. But responsibility, because I think of the principle of sacrifice, responsibility means you don't have to be incentivized to do something. And so that's why, like, in my opinion, I say we don't even have to go through a huge structural change. We could, even if we wanted, retain our capitalist society. And now this is harder to do. It's actually easier, in my opinion, to change the society than it is to just say, okay, everyone be responsible. but technically, if we were all responsible and we weren't needing to be incentivized to spread our wealth, it would be extremely, companies do this, responsible companies do this all the time. Should we increase profits or treat our employees better? How about we treat our employees better? Should we increase profits or make crappier quality products? Like, all the time companies choose, we're going to do the right thing here. Sometimes they choose to do the right thing in one area and not other areas. And bringing this back to like this whole concept of farming and where our food comes from. Absolutely. If we want to avoid kind of that food crisis that I think is with just the age of the average farmer in America that I think is coming, if we want to avoid that, within the next 2 to 3 years, we need to have more people that say, am I willing to sacrifice my 200K, 300K, 400K possible income down this career path for a 80, 90K rest of my probable life in order to supply food for a somewhat local community of people that can afford food prices, that are also kind of in the same boat with me, that are willing to increase their expenses so that they can have food that's locally grown. And on every side of that equation, is it going to work? Absolutely. Do farmers markets exist? Yes. Evidence that it will work. Do people like spend that much on food? 100%. Yes. The question is, can you, and this is a problem with business all the time, can you convince people that it's worth them paying more?
Can you get that solidarity? which is really what I'm trying to advocate for in the Kindness Rebellion, is building a new vision for humanity and building that new solidarity that everyone can have individual responsibility for, to make sure that we're actually moving in that direction. And the reason that I am so outspoken against capitalism specifically is because I think that the fundamental vision and the fundamental idea of capitalism is exploitation, is profit, because at the bottom line is what capitalism functions under. It's always make sure that you are putting in as little as possible and getting as most of it out. And yes, you can have nuance within that. You can have human beings that understand, oh, I have workers that are responsible for creating this wealth. I need to treat them well. But on my problem, and like, I'm getting a little off tangent here, but, so yes, there can be those businesses that understand, oh wait, this is actually a very fragile, interdependent system of other beings, not just the profit incentive, not just economic incentives. But the problem is that at the end of the day, they rely on that fundamental motivation. They rely on the fundamental motivation of profit, because it's not as simple as just like, oh, okay, yeah, I mean, profit's there, but, you know, we can focus on other things. It's like if you took out the profit incentive, the entire structure would collapse. It has no way of sustaining itself. So the thing that I've been so interested in is understanding, is it even possible to get rid of the profit incentive? Maybe it's not, but I think by removing money as the system of like generating that wealth that you're talking about, that growth that you're talking about, which is what has been so valuable for capitalism and with capitalism. I wonder if we can just change the measurements of our success, if we can change the idea of like, what is actually going to be creating more wealth? What is creating more value in our community? Is it just money? I'd argue that maybe it's not, because money is it's a false resource. It's a very arbitrary thing. You can't eat money, you know. But if we decided, hey, we're gonna operate under this profit incentive in order to achieve growth, but the growth that we're achieving is everybody gets food. Everybody's gonna have enough food to survive. Holy shit! I think like things will change so dramatically. And obviously we can't just immediately go, all right, money's out of the equation, because it's pretty embedded in our society. But I think that's where that sacrifice that we're talking about is going to come from. It's going to say, you know what, money is the false resource right now. It's ruling all of us. It's honestly this crippling hand, in my opinion. But if we say we're going to start taking that monetary resource to build actual resources to make sure that everybody in our community is fed, I think it's going to change so much. Yeah.
The difficult thing, in my opinion, is that that's a mentality. If it's a systematic change, then I think people will quickly turn back to currency. Because the downside to anything where the actual resource is the value is there's a reason
subjective.
There's a reason we turn to currency, and that's so that if I want your hat and you want, you know, something I'm not willing to give up or something I don't have, I have no way to get your hat.
Yeah.
But I could always incentivize you with, but what, do you want $50 that could like buy you whatever you want? So that's like the benefit of like we all know this, right? So that's all I'm saying is like the difficult thing is that if you try and change this systematically, then the only system to change to remove money is to remove money, which then becomes like, now we have a trade issue. But if we can remove money as a resource in a emotional basis, right, where it's like, which is really just a values thing. Yeah. If it's just like we have a currency, but it's not the currency that I value. It's what I can
access with that currency.
Well, and hopefully not access, because I feel like that's what, kind of what you're saying. Like that's what drives capitalism. Like what can I get out of this is like, that's the definition of profit.
Yeah, it is.
If we can change the mentality to what can, maybe give is the wrong word, but like, what can I produce what value can I add is maybe the best way to say, what value can I add with this? That's, in my opinion, like,
that's the mindset shift.
That has to be the mindset shift, because like I said, a systematic change becomes problematic on a trade perspective. But a mentality shift is in many ways harder to accomplish. But if we can accomplish it, then it doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter if we use it doesn't matter what currency we use or anything.
Or if anything.
that's kind of, the end all be all of like, well, if we're all just focused on creating value for each other,
yeah,
then it's game over for the world. Like,
in a good way or a bad way?
In a good way, like it's as in like, there doesn't need to be any more games of mine and yours, it's all just about, well, how can we build together?
Yeah. And I'm kind of plugging the Moneyless Society a lot because I really value what the work that they're doing. But I really like that you pointed that out, because you're right. There's going to be hella logistical issues with trying to do a systems change, especially with the monetary system. But I think the idea that you're talking about, where it's creating a mindset shift where everybody is moving towards a new vision of, now we're just trying to make sure that everyone's taken care of. We're trying to make sure that everyone can lead fulfilling lives, and then defining that in new ways that isn't fully founded on profit and exploitation and selfishness and greed, but through what I think is understanding, love, and kindness. Then it's just going to point us in a direction where honestly money will probably become obsolete. Yeah, it has its value to us now, and it has its function within our society. But if we started moving in this whole new direction with the technology that we're developing, with the technology that we're building, if it's all centered around the idea of maximizing well-being and helping people, then I honestly believe that it's going to be really easy to obsolete money. It's going to be easy to make sure that that's not what we're fundamentally focusing on anymore.
Well, when there's not need, there's no need for money.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the ultimate issue, because if there's not a need for trade where I have to convince you to sell me your hat, like
so that you can live or something.
So, yeah, like if it really is, and that's, again, I guess kind of bringing Christianity a little bit into this, like I think you'd have to take a pretty far stretch to read any Christian canon, whether it's the Bible, whatever it might be, and imagine to yourself that the structure of heaven is capitalism. Like, that's a pretty far stretch.
Yeah.
If you believe that. And so I think, like, me being a Christian, obviously, like, in no means do I think that capitalism should ever be the end goal. Like I've talked about, do I think it's a tool that is useful? I think it's a tool that is useful.
Yeah.
The same way that I think socialism, communism, any economic structure, which I understand some things I mentioned aren't necessarily economic structures, but like that any of those mindsets or societal rules are all tools to accomplish a goal, right? And when a society is at a place that there no longer needs to be a convincing of, you have something I want and I want it, and trade is more focused on our needs are met, what you have these skills and I have these resources, what can we build together? Like, in my opinion, I think the United States on a resource level is not too far from that. Now, sir, I think as a people we're far from that. But like, I don't think on a resource level we're very far from being able, if there was good enough distribution, to be able to say, our skills are actually the highest value that we have, and the resources are the highest value that we have to the rest of the world. How can we combine our skills and our resources that we've had thanks to a massive amount of education, just the privileges that we have living here in the United States? How can we use those resources to benefit the rest of the world?
Yeah.
And if there was like this ideal situation where one day everyone in the United States was more focused on that, I think you're right. Like, I think that we wouldn't need money, because our focus wouldn't be about like, hey, I want that television set, who's going to sell it to me? Our focus would be on, hey, I want this struggling society that we know about to stop struggling. How are we going to do that together? My needs are met. All of your needs are met. Everyone's needs here are met. How are we going, we're all going to survive. How are we going to help them survive? Then, like, money becomes, or any form of trade becomes almost a non-issue. Because there's no, when there's no need or no want, as far as like material want, then trade isn't a thing.
Yeah, and I honestly love how you frame capitalism as a tool, or just any economic system as a tool, because you're right. It is just kind of, it's giving us access to what we want. And I think my main problem with capitalism at this time, or at this rendition, this mutation
This
of
rendition
it,
of your
yeah, is just that it's founded on, you give what, like, we'll provide whatever's wanted, and we're continually having a positive feedback loop of giving people the things that are actually like killing them, like a TV, like this, like our screens, like just really shitty foods and things like that, and making sure that it's done in a way that's profitable. But if we can actually build systems, and this is where I really think that systems change is needed, is if we can build economic systems that are providing the needs and then the wants, then we're going to be a lot better off. And if we focus way more on the needs and making sure that everybody has those needs, then like you said, we're just going to have a much better interaction between our skills and our wants.
Yeah,
I think is really valuable.
No, I don't think there's any doubt about that. Yeah.
It's just a matter of how the hell do we get there.
Yeah.
And I think just to bring it all back to the beginning, I think homesteading, or just the entire process of reintegrating ourselves with how we evolved, like our nature, and understanding where our food comes from, understanding our environment so that we know the actual resources that we do have here, is going to be a big part of that. It's about raising that global consciousness and being able to then say, okay, this is where we're at. This is the really amazing technologies and systems that we've developed, but we want to now gear it in a new way that's focused on sustainability and kindness.
Yeah, which, absolutely is something that you will get to see if this is something, if homesteading is something you choose to do. There is so much innovation happening in this sphere that it does make things a lot easier. I mean, Anna and I, we live 5 days out of the week down in the valley because we both work down there. Excuse me, but our pigs survive without us. If we were better at growing plants, our plants would survive without us. And that's simply, we have timed systems now that can drop food in a bucket on a timed basis. You have timed systems where water can be, ran through a hose on a timed basis. Simple things like that simply, like, even if the technologies were there in our parents' generation or even our grandparents' generation, like, was that accessible? No. Was that like a $50 thing you could buy from your local tractor supply? No. Right? That was like brand new technology that was hundreds of dollars that only farmer, like these big farms could afford. Now that's not the case. And so if you're going, I think that, like, for anyone considering homesteading, the beautiful thing is that now, like, I think that maybe before it was a complicated thing because it was like, how am I even going to get the stuff I need? Like, how am I going to lay out the land so that I can even get water to the right places? Like, thanks to the hose, like, thanks to this magical invention, like, and just how accessible that is in a reliable way. Because, I mean, the hose has been around for a long time, but reliability is kind of a questionable thing. Like, in a reliable way that we have access to now, homesteading is no longer a complex issue. It's really about, like, here's the thing. If your values are set that you're willing to conduct manual labor for really no incentive except for the, like, joy of doing it, then homesteading is for you. And it's not going to be complicated. You're going to get cheaper land. You're going to get, like, a way sweeter deal on real estate than anyone else is going to, because this is all low priority. You're tax incentivized, so you get lower taxes on your property, right? Like, so, like, on an affordability perspective, if you're young and you're looking for a way to establish your life for as little money as possible, this is the way to do it. If you're wanting to live like Anna and I are, where you're half in, half out, where, we're still living the city life. I'm an entrepreneur. I very much work and live in the business world during the week. Anna's a school teacher in Park City, right? And so if you're wanting to do that, then the resources are absolutely there for you to be able to do it. And it's a great way to establish, those skills and kind of the assets. Again, I'm kind of drifting back into like the things that I wish weren't required, but kind of are required because of our society right now. Like, if you are a Utah resident that's complaining about home prices, you're going to find it $2,000 or $3,000 cheaper out here. And, are you going to have to commute? You're going to have to commute. You better get an Audible subscription, and have lots of podcasts and things to listen to. But that's what we do, and it works. Thanks to, honestly, thanks to electric cars, thanks to, cause we save a lot of money thanks to that. Thanks to, those automated systems I was talking about that can feed our animals while we're gone, that can water our plants while we're gone, et cetera, et cetera. This is a lifestyle where you don't have to be all in to get started. And I think that that's maybe one of the biggest things that might be helpful to people that want to get into homesteading, is that you don't have to feel scared about like, how am I going to make enough money to pay for my home once I move out into rural country? Like, what job am I going to have except for like working at a gas station? If as long as you find a place within what you're willing to drive for your commute, you can be half in, half out, at least for as long as you need to. Especially now that jobs are getting more work remote friendly and stuff like that. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw that out there that like, it's not complicated anymore. It's actually pretty simple. It's just simple doesn't mean it's easy. Simple doesn't mean that, that you're going to have any time on your hands. 'Cause with the added commute, the added just like taking care of life, on top of living, working a full-time job or going to school, whatever you might be doing, like, you will certainly be busy. It is certainly difficult. But you can absolutely get started.
I really like that distinction you make between it being like simple versus easy kind of thing. It's not something that you can literally just like set up and have it just run on its own and you don't even have to think about it anymore. It is something that you have to put your consciousness into. You have to put your time into it. Even though it is actually manually simple, it's just manual. You have to do it. You have to actually be there at least to set it up, or at least to and to maintain it and things like that. So, and honestly, that's, at least for me personally, that is kind of the steps I'm wanting to move towards, because I really think that a lot of our society is trying to automate things, not to free us up for creating true value in our lives through our connections with other people and through our connection with the environment, but freeing up our time in order to just distract ourselves. And to kind of like numb ourselves. And I'm wanting to move out of that so that the time and the consciousness that I'm putting into life and living is more valuable to me, and is actually developing skills that I think are going to just change my value sets and change my mindsets. And I think and I hope that that's the intention for more people.
Yeah, well, 100%. We have more time on our hands than any generation has ever had, ever. Thanks to cars, highways, phones, list goes on. Automation at work even, right? I mean, automation is a big sphere I work in. And I'm able to run a business without having to do any of my accounting, without having to do like any of the hard business work that most people, dread, because I automated all of it. So like I put 4 or 5 hours a week into managing the business. And the rest of the time I put in is more just like, I want to put it in because I want the business to grow. So it's like 3 to 4 hours a week is all I need to maintain my current income, and the rest is growth. Like, that's
cool.
awesome.
That's fantastic.
That's fantastic. And that's why I'm able to live the lifestyle I do, right? So, but that's the thing, is what you do with the time that automation gives you, what you do with the time that our generation is like afforded, privileged to have, like that's kind of on you. And in my opinion, like, if you aren't spending that time doing fulfilling things, you're not going to be fulfilled. Like I absolutely, I love kind of like the geometrical metaphor of fractals. And I like to apply it to life a lot, of just like, the more you zoom in on a fractal, of course you see the same pattern. That's what a fractal is it the same pattern up above continues as you get further down. And in my opinion, I like to look at that like on a minute by minute basis, or a day by day basis, or a month by month basis, or a year by year, or for your whole life. Like, if you want your life to look a certain way, you need to start modeling. Yeah, model your minutes that way, model your day that way, and then your years are going to start looking like that.
Yeah.
And your decades are going to look like that. And then when you look back at your life when you die, you're going to say, my life looked like how my day looked like.
Yeah.
And so if you're,
there could be immense value in that.
Absolutely. And so, you know, obviously, like, a lot of listeners of this podcast may be in a circumstance where they don't have a lot of extra time. But if you are one of those people that, you know, as you're listening to this, you maybe are getting a little slapped in the face, I'm sorry, of like you do have 3 to 4 hours of personal time a day, and you choose to spend that time doing something that is not what you want to look back on your life having, you know, as kind of like what you want your legacy to be, then, you know, get interested in homesteading, or get interested in, you know, building a business, or get interested in doing something that adds value to your life and to other people's lives. And that 3 to 4 hours a day is all you need to, a month from now, have something pretty cool.
Yeah.
And 6 months from now, have something pretty cool that works.
Yeah.
And a year from now, have something really cool that works
and inspires people
and is inspiring people, or adding true value. You know, it took, and I think that that's just a real pattern, you know, and that can be sped up with certain resources. But like for Audio House, I'll just use that as a quick example. It took us about,
which is your business,
which is it's our business. It's Automated Recording Studios. And I won't put a plug here really. If you want to, I guess you could look at audiohouse.fm, and there I just gave a plug.
That's fine.
But like, if, you know, Todd's my business partner. He and I were both in school, working full time as we were building it, right? It was only a few hours a day that we had to actually work on it. Over a few months, we had something that we thought was pretty cool. Did it work? No. Does it work to how we want it? Not even like 5 or 4 years later. No, it doesn't. But did it work enough to start adding value to people's life? Yeah, within about 3 months it did. And the more we improved on it, within about 2 years, it was adding value to enough people's lives that you know, it was substantial. It was a few hundred people a year that we were benefiting. And if Todd and I had different ethical beliefs, it probably would have been enough to sustain us financially, but we were charging way too little for that.
Yeah.
And so in about 3 years, it was doing well enough for me to leave my full-time job that I had. A year after that is where we're at now. And yeah, like Todd and I have no other jobs.
That's so rad.
We're still charging way low than, you know, when I tell most other people as I network with other business people and I tell them what we're charging, they're like, what? Like, that's stupid. Like, people would pay way more for that. And it's like, well, it's not about what people would pay.
It's about what people can pay.
It's about what, it's, you know, it's not only, I guess, can as in like, well, in my opinion, true affordability is that you can do it often enough. You can do it as often as you healthily would like to.
Okay.
You know, so we try and set our prices so that most musicians can make music as often as they would healthily like to.
That's awesome.
Is it cheap enough that like the obsessed person who wants to make music 24/7 could maybe afford it? Maybe not.
Probably not.
But like the average musician does 2 to 3 songs that they kind of spit out of their brain that they feel is like confident enough that they're like, I actually want to turn this into a song. There's about like 2 to 3 of those a month for you know, for the average musician. Can they afford with us 2 to 3 songs a month? Absolutely. And that's kind of what we're going for. So anyway,
that's awesome.
You know, over 4 years, we've been able to build something that adds a lot of value and works really well. And yeah, all it took was at the beginning, you know, sacrificing that 1 to 2 hours a day that we had, where, you know, we could have been doing lots of other things. So
That's awesome. I think we can start to kind of wrap this up here, because I've really valued this conversation, Tyler. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this, because I love the breadth of situations and topics that we covered, because I think I mean, it's just so valuable to me, and I can tell that you've really put in the work, and you've been doing such awesome and cool things, and it really inspired me, which is obviously why I asked you to be on the podcast. So I mean, if nothing else, I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time on this, man. And I hope to continue doing these in the future.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, if you ever want to get into not podcasting, that's what you're doing. If you ever want to get into homesteading is what I meant to say. Or if anyone listening wants to actually get into homesteading and kind of see more of like what that journey logistically looks like, and the details of like, one example is like, how did you even find property? Because you look on Zillow and you can't find any, because people out here that are trying to sell their homes, they tend to not be the most technologically advanced people. Yeah. They're not listing their home on Zillow, so like, or Homey or anything like that. So like, if you want to hear about what we did to actually like do what we're doing, where we bought certain things from, where we got our pigs, blah, 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 that's all stuff I'm happy to talk about. Like even on a one-on-one perspective, if anyone hits us up on Instagram, my Instagram username should be changed because it's embarrassing, but it's white shirt and tie. Tie is spelled Ty. So white shirt and Ty. And if you just DM me anytime or whatever, I'm more than happy to kind of walk you through things.
Fantastic. Yeah. And especially if I start getting into it more, because I really do want to, it's a goal of mine. We'll definitely cover some more of that on the podcast here.
Cool.
Sweet.
Totally.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Kindness Rebellion. I really appreciate you guys being here and exploring this journey with me. I absolutely loved this conversation with Tyler. It was so amazing, so enlightening, and there was just a lot of good information and a lot of really hopeful information. And I hope that if I sent this to you, or if you just happen to actually listen to it, I just want you to know thank you so much. Like, it really means a lot. This is actually something very, very important to me, and having these conversations with these wonderful people in my life has been one of the most valuable experiences ever. It's creating such immense meaning. So please make sure to let me know you like it. Please engage with it. Share it around, or talk to me about it, okay? Like, let's keep the conversation going. It's the only thing that gets us to actual action and actual change. So please keep subscribing, sharing it around, commenting, liking it, doing it, whatever it is, And if you're a musician, make sure to check out audiohouse.fm, Tyler's business. It's a really awesome tool for any musicians who just need to kind of get these really cool ideas that they have out of their head and into an actual song. It's a really valuable service, so make sure to support him. Thank you so much for listening.